Hello, everybody. I'm Douglas McLeod. I'm the chair of the REIC Center for Architecture at Athabasca University, and I wanted to welcome you to this, which I think is our 8th event in the Global Studio Series, and a very interesting one as well. I'm not going to say too much because I know we've got a lot of time. I just wanted to say welcome. I see some of our friends from around the world, and it's always nice to see. And the one thing I did want to share with you is we are trying to move forward with continuing events, and so I can tell you that I think on December the 10th, it's sort of still tentative, we're hoping to do a session on how to create a successful portfolio. A portfolio for both getting into, say, a Master's of Architecture program or for landing your first job. We hope to have some experts on what to look for and also some talk about color and type and layout. So that should be on December 10th, probably about the same time as usual, 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. We're going to follow that up, though, early in January with a chance for students to, we can't do a huge number of students, but we're hoping for around 8 students from around the world to share their portfolios with all of us and get some comments and reviews and suggestions from our panel of experts. Tentatively, that's scheduled for, Henry, is it just January 7th, 14th, or? So we'll look at that. And then following that, we're working with Wanda Della Costa of the Indigenous Design Center and Joy, who I see is online as well, from the AVID at the University of Calgary. We hope in January and February to set up a session on equity, diversity, and inclusion in design and design education. And so those are our upcoming events. As always, though, if you've got something you'd like to talk about, please let us know. But stopping there, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay to introduce today's session. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Douglas. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the Building to Thrive panel discussion as part of Athabasca University's REIC Center for Architecture's Global Studio Series. I am Lindsay Farr from AVID Architecture, and I will be moderating today's event. Just before we jump into the event, though, I just want to let everyone know that if you do attend the Zoom session for today's panel discussion for at least 60 minutes or more, you will automatically receive a professional development certificate. So that certificate you'll receive in about the next 5 business days, and it will be made out with the name on the certificate for how you logged into Zoom today. So we are honored to be hosting this event today in partnership with Athabasca University, along with the Parkdale-Crondell Community League and also the Rat Creek Press. We started planning this event because we are passionate about creating safe spaces in our community. We really want to ignite the conversation about how we can build safe spaces that allow us all to thrive. And our goal isn't just to create safe spaces that meet our basic needs of shelter, but to instead create spaces that support our well-being, allowing us to live and work in the best possible way, and hopefully create spaces that can ignite joy. I work at AVID, an architectural firm based here in Edmonton, Alberta, where we take a collaborative, community-focused approach to all of our projects. At AVID, we are passionate about creating safe spaces, so much so that we've actually created a course called Building to Thrive Training. And it's an opportunity for participants to learn about how they can contribute to creating safer spaces within their own communities. So I'd like to take this opportunity to have each of our event sponsors just take a moment to introduce themselves. So as I mentioned, we are here with Athabasca University's REIC Center for Architecture. And then we're also here with Parkdale-Crondell Community League. And we've partnered with them for today's event, and they have a mission to build strong, healthy, safe, and sustainable community. And joining us from Parkdale-Crondell is Kevin Wong. So Kevin, I'll just turn it over to you to take a minute to introduce the Community League.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Wong. I'm representing Parkdale-Crondell Community League here. For those that are not familiar with the community league structure, we are a community organization. We have a board, and we do a bit of recreational activity in the community, and we also look into like civic issues and basically anything the city is not kind of having resources to do, we there to catch it and trying to represent the community at different tables. So that's kind of what a community league is. Lindsay was asking me why safe space is important for Parkdale-Crondell Community League. For those who don't know where Parkdale-Crondell is, we kind of located in Edmonton, Alberta in the northeast corner, or not corner, like region of the city by the stadium. We have a population of about 6,000 people with a lot of new immigrants and low-income families. And for those families, in order to kind of foster a community integration, we believe like safe spaces is actually very, very important, because can you imagine just going to a community, not knowing anybody and not feeling safe? So we trying really hard to create a safe environment for our community members through different kind of activities, installations, and the way that we use our building. So I can't wait to hear more about what the panelists have to say and in the breakout sessions following.
Thank you, Kevin. Also joining us today as an event partner is the Rat Creek Press. They are a not-for-profit community newspaper that serves several Edmonton neighborhoods, including the Parkdale-Crondell community. The Rat Creek Press is dedicated to fostering a strong, vibrant, and well-connected community. And joining us today from the Rat Creek Press, we have George Crawford.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm the youth culture and community director with the Rat Creek Press. And like Lindsay has said, our main means of developing community is not in the physical of the community, but in the interconnection between the people, and bringing people together in terms of recreational activities, partnerships between different organizations, and bringing together events like this so that people from our community and from communities elsewhere can learn from each other and communicate their different needs, as well as their different goals and how they achieve those things. Thank you.
Thank you, George. For today's event, we will start off with a panel discussion, and following that, we would like to have audience participation in some smaller group discussions led by our panelists and also our event partners. So we know that we have people joining us from all over the globe today, and think it would be great to have these smaller discussions about building safe spaces and hopefully hear some ideas and examples from all over the world. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about this after our panel discussion, but just thought I would mention sort of a little bit of the event format up front. We're excited to have 5 panelists joining us today for the Building to Thrive panel discussion to talk about how we can build safe spaces in our communities. When talking about safe spaces, we aren't just talking about how to design a space to create physical safety, but also considering how we can design spaces to support emotional and mental safety as well. And each of the panelists joining us today brings a diverse perspective to today's conversation, and we're really grateful to have them share their time and expertise with us. Before we start the panel discussion, I'm just going to ask each panelist to take a few minutes to introduce themselves and also just tell us a little bit about their interest in safe spaces. So first up, we have Cynthia Dovell joining us today. Cynthia is the principal architect at AVID Architecture. Cynthia, I'm wondering if you could take a couple minutes just to introduce yourself and tell us about your interest in safe spaces.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm the owner of AVID Architecture, and I am also the Alberta Chair of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. And most of you don't know this, but I also helped to create the architectural design studios at Athabasca University and instructed them for a few years. But what I really wanted to tell you about our topic today was that I have personally moved over 20 different times in my life, probably about every 2 years or so, if I break it down. And moving so much, there were lots of good aspects to that. I learned a lot, but there were also lots of traumatic experiences with moving so much. And what I learned from it as a result of being displaced all the time, never getting comfortable, never being able to forge deep multi-year friendships, not ever having very many belongings, and always having this constant need to figure out how to best help myself be comfortable, is that I really developed this deep understanding of the power of landscape, and especially the built environment, to impact the way that I feel, the way that I act, and how connected I feel to the world around me. and my overall personal well-being. And so that's why our mission at AVID Architecture is to create architecture that inspires joy and also supports people's well-being.
Thank you, Cynthia. Next up, we have Anne Stevenson joining us. Anne works in affordable housing at the Right at Home Housing Society here in Edmonton. So welcome, Anne.
Thanks so much, Lindsay, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Leslie mentioned, my name is Anne Stevenson. I'm originally from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I work for the Right at Home Housing Society. So we're a community-based, not-for-profit that provides affordable housing for a diversity of people in our community. I'm a registered city planner, and I came to the profession in a sort of roundabout way. I actually studied international development and economics in my undergrad. And as part of that program, I spent a year overseas living and studying in Ghana. And something that really struck me during my time there was, there were so many NGOs in this town where I was staying. And, some NGOs took a health-based approach to development, and some took a women's rights-based approach. Others took a democracy approach. And so much of it seemed sort of intangible to me. It sometimes seemed to be overlapping or working even at cross purposes to each other. And I was lucky to come across a case study of a Brazilian town called Curitiba, and the mayor was an architect. And he took a very built form, design-led approach to developing and allowing the people of his city to thrive. And that really inspired me. I loved the idea of creating these concrete spaces that supported health, that supported connectivity, that supported women's rights and democracy. So with that inspiration, I carried on to do a master's in urban design in the UK, and I've been working in planning and urban design for the past 12 years. So I truly believe that our cities can be places of equity, that our built environment can actually help erase the disparities between different members of our community and give us all a place to thrive. So I'm really excited to talk more about it and learn from the other panelists today.
Thank you, Anne. Next, we have George Crawford joining us. As George mentioned already, he is the Youth, Culture, and Community Director at the Rat Creek Press, as well as an architecture student at Athabasca University. George also lives in Parkdale, Crondell community, so he's actually connected with all of our partners that are a part of today's event. George, could you please take a couple minutes to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. I've had a lot of trouble thinking about how to introduce myself for this, because I've had a really long and interesting course to get to where I am today. Talking about being able to thrive and being able to make that happen. And so I've kind of come up with, I'd like to share with you that I have a bipolar disorder. I'm on medication for it. I've experienced quite a few things because of that in my life. And as many of you may know, it's related to, there is a genetic component. So my family as well as a history of mental illness, addictions, and things like that. So coming from a place of turbulence to a place of being able to thrive has been a very interesting and different, it has offered me a really different perspective on a lot of things, I find. And one major aspect to that is how valuable it can be to have not only spaces that make you feel physically safe, but as well, having that mental and emotional security to be able to start to look at trauma, start to look at these things that have held me back in the past and caused me to interact with less than healthy coping mechanisms, being able to change that around and being able to move instead towards who I am today and being able to speak to you. And yeah, I'd just like to thank all of you for having me. Thank you very much.
Thanks for sharing your story, George. Also joining us today is Ophelia Leon. Ophelia is a counseling therapist with her own private practice here in Edmonton, Alberta as well. Welcome, Ophelia. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. I feel like a kid in a candy store. Ah, faces. So I am in private practice, and the name of my private practice business is Befriending Self. And that is because my belief is that we have many parts of ourselves that we need to be in peace and in safety with, even when we don't like some parts of ourselves. So this idea of safety really spoke to me to be present today so personally and professionally. Professionally, in my line of work, we need to pay attention to not only safety, emotional safety, but also physiological safety, and how we are very complex and intelligent animals, but we are animals, and so we share some physiological needs and with other animals in the world that sometimes get overlooked when talking or building safe spaces. And on a personal note, as you can hear in my Spanglish, I am a mix of cultures and ethnicities. And so from living in close to the equator for the first 26 years of my life, then living in the Northwest Territories close to the North Pole for 7 years, and then coming back to Edmonton for the last 6 years, I think I can add a little bit of a perspective in what it is to adapt to a place where at the beginning you don't know anything about, and then making it home. I now kind of feel a little bit like a citizen of the world, because I have all kinds of components in my genetic material and also in the studies I've done. So some of my roots for foundation of the way I work is something called somatic experiencing. That is a psychobiological, physiological way of understanding human beings. I also have training in neuroaffective touch, and also in Gestalt psychotherapy and in compassion focused therapy. So I'm kind of a little bit of a science junkie, respectfully said so. But the most important part of learning about science and about physiology is how do I apply it into relating to my environment and people in the present time, no matter where I come from, and just really adapting what is happening here and now. So I'm very excited to be here, and thank you very much for inviting.
Thank you, Ophelia. Our fifth panelist joining us today is Chelsea Jerzak. Chelsea is the founder and principal of Situate, a planning company also located here in Edmonton, Alberta. Chelsea, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in safe spaces.
Thank you, Lindsay, and hi, everybody. My name is Chelsea Burba. As Lindsay said, I'm an urban planner here based in Edmonton, Alberta. To give you a bit of background about me, I completed my undergrad and master's degrees at the University of Saskatchewan, where I studied regional and urban development, as well as human geography. So I was always really interested in how places impact people's perceptions. My research in university focused a lot on how certain places in the city, particularly transit stations and underground rail systems, impact people's perceptions of safety and personal well-being. So after university, I went on to work in the field of urban planning. And in 2016, I started Situate and joined the board of IDEA, which stands for the Infill Development in Edmonton Association. So Situate's purpose is to support awesome infill projects through the land entitlement process. So basically, we work with and guide landowners through the municipal rezoning, subdivision, and permitting processes. So as many of you on this webinar probably know, infill, or really any kind of urban redevelopment, particularly in established neighborhoods, can often be really contentious, which ultimately makes total and complete sense, I think, because as humans we're really connected to a sense of home. It's very important to us as our anchor, in what can be a pretty chaotic world. especially this year when we're going through a lot of uncertainty and change. So any sort of change to that environment can feel really threatening and can make us feel as humans really uncomfortable. So my interest in safe spaces these days has evolved, and it's really focused on the question of how can we, as city builders, create a sense of safety in the midst of uncertainty in a changing environment. And I think that ultimately, this is a question of personal resilience, and it's something that I'm really interested in exploring today on the panel, together with the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Welcome to all of our panelists. We know that you're all very busy and are grateful that you are here with us today to share your perspective on safe spaces, and we're really looking forward to the discussion about building to thrive. When talking about safe spaces, we aren't just talking about physical safety, but also mental and emotional safety as well. What do the terms building to thrive and creating safe spaces mean to each one of you panelists joining us today? We're curious about how you actualize this in your profession, and if you have any personal stories about the impact of physical, mental, or emotional safety that you could share with us today. Cynthia, could you please start off the conversation and share your thoughts with us on this?
Sure. So lately, my office has been taking a course about Indigenous cultures across Canada. And what really hits home is the power that landscape has in shaping culture and society and familial and governance structures throughout history. And today, with the majority of us living in urban areas, the landscape that's really shaping us is the built environment. And that's why even though physiologically speaking, we humans are wired to connect, today, a lot of us are suffering from a very high level of disconnection. And when it comes to building to thrive, to me, this is really about building spaces that support people in connecting and feeling their best so that they can connect with others. And what I think is that the majority of us feel even subconsciously unsafe a lot of the time. And in order to thrive, we've got to feel safe first. And our built environment is just not helping us to the extent that it can. And I've got an example. So when I was around 11, I was often very disruptive at school, and understandably, the teacher needed to do something. So I actually spent the majority of my school year with my desk at the very front of the classroom attached to the blackboard. And then the teacher's desk and all the other students were behind me, and they were all facing me. And I was put there so that I couldn't engage with the other students, and I could specifically feel everybody's eyes looking at me because they were looking at the blackboard, and so they were at my back. And in other words, it really made me feel quite vulnerable, and I had this feeling of being watched. And most people would feel that way in that situation. But in our built environment, if you were walking outside on a sidewalk next to a large building that had a mostly uniform and plain facade, but with lots of windows, a lot of people on the sidewalk would get that same feeling of being watched. And it's uncomfortable, and it subconsciously can put people on edge, and they won't even know why. And a similar effect can happen when we're in a tight or dark or cluttered quarters. We're much more likely to subconsciously feel agitated or irritable or unable to think clearly. And the opposite is true when we're in spaces that are filled with natural light and are more open and in proportion to the human body. We're a lot more likely to feel expansive and creative and positive, and being able to connect with others in that time. So building to thrive is really about creating spaces that help people to feel well so that they feel safe and supported, and they can more easily connect with others from a place of well-being and not from a place of vulnerability or agitation.
Thanks, Cynthia. Those are some really great examples of how our built environment around us does really impact us all the time. And I'm curious, Anne, if you could share some of your thoughts as well with us on this.
Yeah, it's great that Cynthia mentioned connections or feeling connected. So for me, when I think about thriving in our built environment, there's really two spheres to look at. So there's the public sphere, our shared streets, green spaces, even buildings, commercial areas where we meet and congregate, or used to meet and congregate. And then there's also the private realm, which is the home. And absolutely, the public sphere to me is about creating that sense of connection. So it is ensuring that people feel part of their community, that they can meet each other, sort of know the people around them. It's also about creating physical connections. So from an urban design perspective, a lot of our communities are built in a way that aren't connected. So low density housing is located very far away from any amenities. People can't walk anywhere, they need to get in their car. So not only does that sort of create a dislocation in terms of connecting with the amenities around you, it also means that you're probably not taking active transportation, you're not walking. And that healthy piece, I think that physically active piece is also really fundamental to our emotional and mental well-being. So thinking about the public sphere as, really a place of connection. But then in balance to that, we have our private sphere, our homes. And for me, those are really a place of sanctuary, and that being such an important part of our mental and emotional well-being. So it's a place to recharge, to sort of withdraw and build up our inner resources. Something I've been really aware of in my own home lately is noise. I have a newborn and an 8-month-old now, and she's a very light sleeper. I have a partner who's here working from home. So noise, just construction noise from outside. I'm just noticing how much the acoustics of a space really contribute or detract from a sense of sanctuary, a sense of rest and relaxation. In terms of my current work now, we have the opportunity to provide people with homes, people who otherwise wouldn't have a place to call home. And just having that foundation is so essential, so important for people to thrive. So it's so exciting to be able to be part of that work. And when we're designing our homes, we absolutely make sure that they are, as Cynthia was mentioning, that they're well lit, that they are places of beauty. And then we're also really intentionally building in places of community as well. So in one of our housing developments, it was Canada's first net zero multifamily housing development. So 16 beautiful townhomes for large families. So they're 3 to 5 bedroom units. We also built a community hub building. So it was replacing an existing worship space. There's a daycare in the basement, and it's widely used by the community. So it's a real point of connection between our residents, between the neighborhood. And I think it's really helped everyone to thrive.
Thanks. And talking about this idea of the public and private, those are things that we think about as architects all the time, and the transition between the two spaces. But also on a personal level, I kind of connected with what you were saying about low density housing. I live in a rural community, and so neighbors are farther and fewer between. And so sometimes it has a little bit of an isolating feel as well. So something that I'm thinking about. But thank you. And George, I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think just to expand off of what Anne was saying, to me, it seems like there's this very big disconnect between an individual safety and a form of community safety that comes up. I had much the same experience of school as Cynthia did, in lots of different ways to try and force me to behave a certain way, which now I know wouldn't have necessarily been possible. But that was sort of this use of a social construct to not necessarily create safety, but create continuity, versus more of an individual aspect, where it is how I would have chosen to behave and how I would have chosen to be able to learn and experience things and experience safety. And I think there is this disconnect is seen everywhere. It's the, we are very interested in being out in nature or being out among trees or in parks and things like that. And we have this sense that there's a safety in this individuality, in this isolation. But then there's also this safety that we get from community, the safety that for me has really been a part of, being a part of the Rat Creek Press, the Parkdale Cromdale Community League. I know people in my community, in my neighborhoods that, I can turn to, and there's this separation between that, where we're always trying to get away from people, yet people can also be a source of safety for us, a sense of calm and community, and help stabilize the way that we live. And yeah, I think that there's in building this as I study architecture and learn more things, it really brings me to think about how does it come together, and how can we have this safety of the individual and safety within a community without creating senses of isolation like we have now. How can we do these things? And it's a very tough question. There's lots of people who've been thinking about it, and lots of ways to look at it. Recently it's been my interest has been a lot in Jane Jacobs and her writing about how safety can be created through community and these different interactions between people and how they work together. And it's very much a question of how you can balance those two aspects of what make people feel safe, what makes people feel safe. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Those are some really important questions for the conversation. Ophelia, I would love to hear your thoughts and your personal experience as well.
Yes, there is a scientist called Stephen Porges, and he coined the term neuroception. That is, it's like perception, but it happens under our consciousness. And actually humans, we check physically our safety in the environment every 4 seconds without knowing it. And so there are some aspects of the environment that of course influence our sense of safety, and also very important, the state of our own nervous system also influences our sense of safety. And so one example I can give you, a personal example, because I have such bad eyesight, my ears and my nose are very, very sensitive. And so something that I discovered very recently is that when I go out in the public, I actually, just out of curiosity, wore earphones, that noise canceling earphones. And it was just so amazing how when I returned home after that outing, I felt so energized. So my question was, wow, what was I spending my energy into blocking the sounds that my nervous system found disturbing, that I didn't even realize? And so, for example, one of the wonderful equipment of mammals is the social engagement system, and is the latest evolutionary system to develop in mammals. And so part of this system is our faces, our eyes, the prosody of our voices, and our ears. And it's so fascinating that our middle ear actually changes to perceive more noises with low frequency when we are in a state of not feeling safe. So literally our ears adapt depending to how we feel inside in general. So that has been kind of an eye-opening for me. Also, so when I bring people into my office, I also like to offer a lot of choice. And that's, I think, is very important when you are thinking about public spaces. You know, I'm part of the training team of the Somatic Experiencing Institute, part of the assisting team on the training. And one of the things that we really like to include is corners in the room where we are training, where people have the opportunity to change things in the environment to feel better. Things like, you know, changing the position of how they're sitting, things like changing the lighting. So our nervous system has a range of states, and also the quality of the history of people offered us a range of how safe we feel in this world. You know, in somatic experiencing, we say the narrative and this, it follows the state of your nervous system. And so it is fascinating how offering people the opportunity to choose the chair and to choose, you know, how openly or how much direct eye contact or no eye contact makes such a huge impact in how comfortable they feel to then really evaluate the choices that they have into how much they reveal and they trust into others. So I think, you know, the possibility of paying attention to low frequency noises in big malls, for example. Many of my clients, they are very functional, and they find it very distressing to go into a mall with a lot of background noises. It's like, I can't explain why, they say, but it's just that I just feel on edge. And so those are our very invisible surveillance capacity as a human being that is picking up all of those cues for our safety. So space is very important, and having choice in how to modulate and change and provide ourselves what we need, very important. Human beings, we are capable of self-regulation, but what sometimes adults forget is that self-regulation comes after co-regulation with other living things. And so having the possibility of in public spaces to regulate how much stimulation people are exposed to and how much they are ready to be out there for can make a big difference. And so our level of tolerance of how much stimulation we can actually process and respond to can really switch and change depending on the environment and depending on how we feel. So neuroception, a very important concept to explore if you are thinking about making safe spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Ophelia. That's really interesting. Chelsea, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. Ophelia, I love your answer, and I think that this is such a great question. For me, I think that thriving in the city is really mediated by how much, how we choose to see the city. So I think that how we see the city can be very personal. For me, for example, I live in the downtown core of Edmonton, and to be honest with you, sometimes I really love it, and sometimes I really hate it. Sometimes I go outside and I see garbage on the street, for example, and I see only, you know, disorder, and it makes me feel really angry. And then sometimes I go out and I see the same thing, and I see the lively aftermath of a party instead. Or sometimes I see a parking lot, and in Edmonton, especially downtown, we have a lot of parking lots, and it makes me really upset that we have so many. And then other times I will walk by the same parking lot and I will see a blanket of snow and urban rabbits. We have a lot of rabbits also in Edmonton, and so I'll see these tracks of rabbits, and I think it's really lovely, and it's the exact same thing that I'm noticing. And I noticed it as well in my work. So as I mentioned earlier, I work in the infill field. So commonly we'll have a new development coming into a neighborhood that represents change. And there's a lot of worry that comes forward with regard to things like traffic, for example. At the same time, there could also be the opportunity to celebrate, more kids in the local school. And all of these responses that I have personally, or that I know that other people have, are possible, and they're all very valid. But there's a myriad of choices that I believe that we have as city builders and as city dwellers. And there's this whole internal sphere, I think, that, we can manage with regard to our perceptions and thoughts that can really help us thrive in the city. So I'd love to have a further chat with Ophelia about that too after this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thank you for sharing all of your personal stories. This can be, a really difficult thing to do sometimes. We're grateful that you have shared these personal moments with us. And so the next question I have for the panelists is, in your experience, what are some barriers that prevent people from thriving? And would you start the conversation on this one?
Sure, happy to kick it off. So in my current work with Housing Society, one of the biggest things that can be a huge barrier to thriving is not having access to a home, not having access to an affordable, safe, and permanent place to call home. In Edmonton and in other jurisdictions as well, we've taken a housing first approach. What that really means is that folks who are currently experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity may be facing some other challenges as well. So whether that is healing from trauma, dealing with addictions. In the past, dealing with those conditions has been a precondition to housing. So you were not able to access housing until you had dealt with your trauma, until you had overcome your addictions. And it's been so clearly seen how unworkable that is. If you can imagine trying to deal with incredibly difficult circumstances without having that foundation of a home. So for me, that's just an essential component to have a place you can call home, to be a foundation for really thriving mentally and emotionally. And I just want to pick up on what George was speaking about as well, just that our built environment can become places of isolation. So I talked before about the private realm being a sanctuary. But the way we design our homes runs the risk of creating spaces of isolation, creating dungeons rather than sanctuaries. So even just thinking about the interface, Lindsay mentioned sort of the public-private realm interface, just being so crucial to how we can feel safe in our homes and still connected to our community. So one condition in Edmonton that comes up quite often is an attached front garage. And for me, what that does is it means that you're just driving straight from the street into your home, into your garage, closing the door, not interacting with any of your neighbors. And often the way these homes are designed, that's the only frontage along the street. So there's maybe a door sort of tucked away around the garage, but there are no windows facing onto the street. So no opportunity to be both home and inside and see what's going on with your neighbors, what's going on the street. So there's some really interesting research from Jan Gale who found that sort of this Goldilocks distance from the sidewalk to your front window is 3.25 meters. And what he found was that if you were any closer, if your front windows were any closer to the street, you tended to feel a bit invaded by street activity going on. So people would close their blinds and just cut themselves off from the street. Conversely, if they were further back, if the homes and windows were further back from the sidewalk, so 4 or 5 meters away, people just felt completely disconnected from the street. So there really is that fine balance of, again, feeling like you are secure in your home, but still connected to the street. And again, just sort of our broader public realm, I think the way we've designed cities has really detracted from creating places of thriving. So indirect or very long walking routes from homes to schools to stores nearby. When it's very low density and spread out and there's no options for good transit. Just driving itself is a fairly disconnected activity to do. You're not going to meet anyone in your vehicle unless there's an accident, in which case it's not the best circumstance to be connecting. And just having, not having access to shared public amenities, so parks and open space, just so fundamental to our sense of well-being and connectivity in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Chelsea, I'll turn it over to you next.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think as humans, we have these two competing needs that have been touched on a couple of times in this panel today. The need for community and togetherness, and then the need for privacy and aloneness. And I think that we haven't yet found a dominant housing form that really balances these two needs very well. So our most common forms of housing, at least in this part of the world, are either very low density, single detached houses, or really high density apartment buildings that, the kind that you can find downtown. And I think that both of these forms of housing are really well designed to meet our needs for privacy and for retreat, but they don't work so well for fostering the kinds of communities that we really need. And they don't foster it very easily, the natural collisions and run-ins that sort of form the network of connections that create a community. I find it really interesting personally that at least in Canada, at least as reported in the media, that most of the spread of COVID-19 is happening in people's private gatherings in their home. There's a lot of shame around this, I think, but I actually find it really interesting because I think it says a lot about us as humans and our need to gather together. And I think it highlights that our lifestyle, our way of living, the way that we built housing around very small family units or around living alone, doesn't really meet our needs very well for community in a lockdown environment. And I do think it raises some questions and possibly some interesting solutions about how we can change to respond to housing in light of what we're going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. George, I'll turn it over to you next.
Could you repeat the question one more time, please? I just want to make sure I word this correctly.
Yes, definitely. So the question is, in your experience, what are some barriers that prevent people from thriving?
I think there are pretty well innumerable barriers to people being able to thrive, to get what they need. In terms of housing, I think like a big thing that has occurred and continues to occur is this inability for people to have not only a home, but a home that is secure, something that they're not going to be afraid of. Because there is an uncertainty that comes with having a house as well, that can be very difficult to express in a lot of ways. Things like, worries about your landlord. There's a lot of evictions going on right now. Worries about how you're going to be able to take care of your home itself. Like having a house, having a home is very expensive. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, and the maintenance and materials that go into that can be a barrier to keeping it well, keeping it safe, making sure it's working properly. Up to the next scale of things, as a community, as a city, we have those similar problems. We are always making sure that we can meet the physical needs of people, but in doing that, we're also taking away we're not taking away anything. We are committed to doing it in certain instances. specifically if you think about water treatment and water, you know, we are able to have access to that. But food and shelter and the other physiological needs that I'm sure Ophelia will dig into later will are going to be are the things, the stepping stones to feeling a sense of safety at all. And then the next level of that is being comfortable, being certain that those things are going to stay there. So as we reach into and start thinking about what the barriers are that prevent people from thriving, we really have to also think about what, where are these conflicts coming from? You know, where is the conflict around ensuring people have housing that they're safe in? You know, even though they may get in trouble, behave in a certain way that isn't necessarily appropriate, how are we going to make sure that they can feel comfortable knowing that they can stay there? I know for me in particular, one worry that I often have is that if I have a manic episode or something like that, you know, with the nature of being a person renting a home, I don't know if I'm going to remember to pay my rent. I don't know if I'm going to just kind of move somewhere else, you know, like those are things that I have anxieties about because those are problems that I face. And those are, there are those problems that exist for everyone, whether they own their home, whether they live in their home. And it really comes to a point of how can we, as people, as a community, decide that that it is important to help people to thrive and make those decisions and help fulfill those needs and make sure that they're going to continue going forward. It's the main, I suppose, the main barrier to it is for us, for community to help people thrive, is actually making that initiative, taking that initiative, and working with people to achieve their goals and to be able to, you know, have a home, have a place to live, and therefore be able to start to really develop a sense of safety, develop a sense of home that they can then, you know, feel a sense of a sense that their life isn't going to be endangered by the actions of the external world. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, George. Ophelia, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, and thank you, George, for giving me a little bit of a cue and from your personal experience. Oh, I have so much to say. I'm just thinking about how to condense it. I think barriers to thrive, wherever human beings are in, barriers to thrive come from either judgment of ourselves, judgment of others, or from others, stigma, and misinformation. Is what what influences our attitude in our openness or our closeness into requesting support and giving support and offering support. You know, most of the difficulties that human beings have, we can be stigmatized for it, you know. And I have in my in an example is, for instance, in my work with the suicide bereavement community here in Edmonton, how the stigma about mental illness and the stigma about suicide in families and close relationships can be so heartbreaking, because the stigma prevents us from sharing what we need in order to continue growing. And then that keeping things silent and keeping things hidden from view from other resources or people or systems that can offer help it's a big issue. So I like to, there is a very easy to remember visual that I have. I call, and this is actually from Dr. Paul Gilbert, it's not authored by me, but when we are facing barriers, we might need to tap into the strange animal of compassion. Compassion has 3 legs. The leg of strength, which is having the emotional tolerance to look at suffering, ours or somebody else's. The second leg of this strange animal of compassion is the wisdom to understand. So the attitude to really wanting to understand rather than judge. And then the third leg of compassion is actually the commitment to do anything we can to reduce the suffering. So I know this is kind of a little abstract, but when we put in practice this way of looking at the world, is so very, it can create such opportunities and bridges for everybody to have a network of support, a network of human and animal support in order to overcome our challenges, you know. So for instance, a very small example of, am I okay with the time?
Yes, but
okay.
We are, yeah.
Okay, so let me just give you a very, very simple example of these 3 legs that I found at the beginning of my years in Canada, you know, more than 20 years ago. I wasn't used to seeing, for instance, community members who were homeless. And I know that at the beginning, when I went walking on the street, my first reaction was to avoid eye contact because it was too painful for me to know there is another human being who is going through this. Now, when I work in my emotional intolerance, I could actually look. Then I saw the background of the tragedy of indigenous history and all of that complexity in our Western society. And so then the second step of, oh my God, so much is happening. So rather than say, oh, it's because, you know, people don't work enough, or it's because this, or because addictions, or because of that, kind of being slow in that judgment and just, oh my goodness, there is so much there I don't know of. We don't know what this person is going through. And who am I to judge that? Now, the third leg is, what is one small thing I can do to reduce the suffering? And if it's a hot summer outside, I cannot provide housing. I cannot provide, a meal every day for this person in distress. However, I could provide a bottle of water. I could provide a bus ticket so that person can at least have a little bit of access to something and reduce the suffering a little bit. Takes a little bit of humility for all of us to know that it takes the whole community to help ourselves and others to thrive. It's nothing that can be done in isolation. So no, this paradigm of competition, we might need to change into a paradigm of cooperation and understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Ophelia. Cynthia.
Oh man, everybody has such great points to say. I'm really loving this conversation. But in terms of barriers to thriving these days, our built environment, for one, just doesn't have enough consideration towards visibility, so views in and out of a space and how that contributes to feeling safe or vulnerable. And that aspect applies to every kind of space, but I'll use an example that everybody can likely relate to. So I want everybody to ask themselves, how comfortable do you feel opening your front door to someone unexpectedly visiting? Can you see out? Can you see them? Can they see in at you? There's so many nuances to visibility and sightlines that can get really complicated, but the bottom line is that most spaces don't consider this enough. And as a result, they just don't support people in feeling safe as much as possible. Oh yeah, someone in the comments said they have a glass front door, and there's a lot of feelings that can come up when you have a glass front door. Like you can feel very exposed, but you also might like the fact that you can see out. There's just a lot to consider there. So secondly, there's just not enough consideration in our built environment towards how people might see themselves as welcome within and belonging to a space. And this also applies to every kind of space. And so, for example, have you ever gotten lost trying to find a building and the address just wasn't visible around? And when you got to the building, you were still unsure if you were at the right place? Or have you ever had mobility issues, and when you got to the place you were going, you encountered a bunch of stairs and no railing, and it just made it difficult to get into the space? Both those examples can trigger subconscious feelings that you're just not welcome. And then another example is a culturally specific community space. Usually we feel very comfortable entering a community center or a religious space when it's related to our own culture and the way that we live, just because we see familiar items in it and we understand the routines that are involved when entering that space. But it's not nearly as comfortable entering a cultural space that you're not as familiar with. And there's so many spatial cues that tell us subconsciously and consciously whether or not we are welcome. And when these aren't understood in the built environment, then very often spaces have the unfortunate effect of being very unwelcoming. And then thirdly, not enough consideration in the built environment towards how a person might find a variety of spatial qualities within a public space so that they can find one that suits them at the moment. And this is kind of related to what Ophelia was saying about choice in your environment. Sometimes we have a need to be upfront and open amongst other people, and sometimes in a public space, we have a need for being on the sidelines, but still being able to see other people around. Our built environment really needs more opportunities to be around other people in a variety of spatial conditions that suits our needs at the moment. And then the last thing that I wanted to say about our built environment is that we're often stuck in this kind of business as usual mentality. Build a building, rinse it, repeat it. And you probably noticed a lot of the built environment tends to look the same, because it's much easier and seemingly faster to repeat what's been done than it is to slow down and consciously reevaluate and slow down. And there's a huge lack of knowledge in terms of how the built environment affects our physiology and our emotions. And it's not really well documented, researched, or understood. And it's not really taught in architectural schools. And I personally believe we should not be building buildings that have a negative effect on our physiology and our ability to connect. And yet 90% of the buildings we have out there are not doing well at that. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. This has been such a great conversation. I still have more questions that I want to ask, but just in the interest of time, it's already after 1 o'clock. So if we want to still have time for those smaller group discussions, I think we need to break now into the smaller groups. But I just want to say thank you, Cynthia, Anne, George, Ophelia, and Chelsea, for this really interesting and important conversation. Each of you guys have shared some really great insight into what safe spaces mean from your perspectives, and also gave us some ideas for things we could think about, and maybe some ways that we can change the spaces that we inhabit every day to allow us to help us thrive in our work and play. So now what we're going to do is break into these smaller group discussions for about 10 minutes. How this happens, Zoom is automatically going to generate the discussion groups. So in a moment, you'll see a window pop up on your screen indicating which group discussion you will be joining. And then you'll automatically be moved over into the new Zoom room. We'll have the smaller discussions for about 10 minutes, and following the breakouts, we'd like to have everyone come back together and ask if anyone wants to share a highlight or something from their breakout discussion conversation with the rest of the participants. So that highlight could be something that you really enjoyed about today's event. It could be a local example someone shared from how they've seen safe spaces implemented in their own communities, or whatever highlight you would like to share with the rest of the group. But I just wanted to check in if there's any questions in the chat box before we do this transition into the small group discussions. Okay, I know some people have to leave because their lunch hour's over, and that's totally fine. But we'll make the transition now into the smaller groups for those that can stay for just a little bit longer.
Okay, so I'll get that started, Lindsay.
Okay, thanks, Henry.
Oh.
Happy to have you, Cynthia.
Thanks. Hey, Carol. Hey, Erin.
Hello.
Oh, there's only 3 of us in this group.
That's really small.
Oh, that's so new.
Hey, everyone. Hey, well, let me know if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, but is it Farabi? And Abdurazak?
Yeah, it's for Robbie. Sorry.
Perfect. I love everybody's like background images for when they're not sharing their screen. They're so nice. Okay, so what we're gonna do in the breakout is just introduce yourself, and then if you could just mention something like any thoughts that you had about the panel discussion as it relates to your life, or any ideas it brought up for you, or and also if you could please let us know where you're joining us from.
Oh, hi, my name is Farabi Bashar, and I'm currently a master's student from Ryerson Building Science Department. So we're doing, I came in here through a project, like a course that I'm doing with Mark. So we were all sent here today after class. And it was basically, this is so like, personally speaking, when I went into building science, I always thought about working with people, like you were talking about well-being, how through a glass door, do I feel safe or do I just feel uncomfortable about that feeling? And that really resonated with me because I mean, so I just moved here. I'm basically from Bangladesh. And so that's like a completely tropical region. So just moving here and all the snow and everything used to be quite like, not really depressing, but like a little different, and how the buildings are so different and everything. And this glass door concept doesn't really have in my part of the world. It's all wood. So yeah, it was quite interesting when you talked about it. So yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing, Farabi, and welcome to Canada. That is a very shocking transition.
Yeah, it is. It is. Thank you for having me.
How about yourself, Erin?
Oh, I'm actually at work right now. I just started a new job as a draftsperson. So I have yet to fully enter into the Athabasca program. And I'm joining from Edmonton. for my takeaways, I'm definitely going to be investigating getting my SIPTED from the Edmonton Police, as well as doing some research into John Gell. That 3-meter setback is, I'm very anti-front yard. I hate the waste of space. So the 3-meter setback is intriguing. I want to kind of explore how we can utilize that space a little bit more. I live in an old neighborhood in Edmonton, and as much as I love being able to see the front yard, and like you mentioned, the glass front door and the windows and everything, and feeling involved within your community, I'm very lucky. I've got a lot of great neighbors that we're very connected. But we've got these green spaces that we don't use, and I wish we could find a better way to use it. So that's kind of where I'd like to explore a little more.
Yeah, that's so cool. How about you, Abdurazak?
Hi, so I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa. It's quite late here already. I think it's 10:15 in the evening. So the architecture office that I work at, we do a lot of community buildings, and it's in areas that are, well, you could call it, well, let's say a bit sub-economic. So we are trying to activate those areas and, create more opportunity by doing community buildings. And so the crime rate generally in that area is quite high. So what we found was, with a lot of passive surveillance, like trying to bring our buildings more towards the street edge and trying to create a lot of openings along like the pedestrian routes, we try and create like more safer space. So the busier the area, and the more public eye there is on the streets and on the streets and in the public squares, then we found it's a lot safer. So we try and bring our buildings towards the boundary edges and the street edges and the courtyard edges, and it creates that public surveillance, and like kids and mothers carrying the children, they feel a lot safer in those areas, and it just works out so much nicer and better. And then I even experienced it myself, where sometimes I'd be walking to work, and then where I work, it's in a completely different area again, where we have these, where the properties have got large gardens, but then it's got high walls. So there's no connection between the street and the houses. And it feels actually quite unsafe, because anything could happen to you, basically.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, thank you for sharing that, Abdurazak.
Thanks.
And how about you, Carol?
Yeah, I actually just want to tell a little story about a program that I'm finishing as a Master's of Leadership and Community Engagement. And as part of that program, I stopped by the food bank in St. Albert, which is a building that I've driven by millions of times and didn't even know that it was in my own neighborhood. I live in a middle-class neighborhood, and about 2 blocks south of us are some massive estates, luxury homes. But it just, once I went into that building, it just was eye-opening as far as what they do for the community, for seniors who are unable to afford their homes, victims of violence, people struggling with addictions. It just is something that I didn't know was in my own neighborhood. So that was really eye-opening. And I just wanted to talk about the impacts of food banks, how they can be community hubs as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually just got this flyer from my community league here, and it just kind of outlines all of the ways that people can volunteer to deliver meals throughout our neighborhood, because the holidays are coming up here. And it's just really eye-opening how many things are happening like behind the scenes that you don't realize. But even a food bank, like not being there, like not knowing that it was there, like it sounds like it's very indescript. And like I wonder what the experience is of people going there to grab some food there. It's almost like they don't want to draw attention to the fact that it's a food bank because they don't want people to know that they're going to go there.
Yeah, I did speak with a couple of the employees there, and it just surprised me because I asked a question about dealing with individuals who have addictions, because in your neighborhood, we don't see many homeless people. And she took that as a little bit of a judgment. And so speaking about the discussion before, maybe in my tone, I sounded judgmental, but I was just curious about how many they dealt with in our neighborhood and how they help them when they come into the food bank.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I totally get that. It's really hard to like reserve judgment. I'm like always trying to practice that when I'm talking with people. Keep an open mind, but just kind of going back to the wall that you've seen in your neighborhood, Abdurazak. In my neighborhood, there's a lot of chain link fences, and like it's in a way it's very similar to a wall in that it's put up and it's put up very high, and you're not meant to like climb over. It's just like meant to deter people from climbing over the chain link fence and to delineate a boundary, but you can see through it, which is why they use it, because they want people to be able to see through and for nothing dangerous to be happening on the other side of that chain link fence. But it actually functions in the same way as a wall in that when you're walking by it, it's a really tall fence, and you subconsciously just tell yourself, oh, that's somebody else's property, so anything going on over there is not my problem. So like, it's a real pet peeve of mine too, is high walls and also chain link fences. Like it would be so much better to just have a really low fence. It just like denotes a boundary and like it gives people a sense that it's a property and you need to act differently when you're on somebody else's property, but it's still open and connected to the community. So if anything bad was happening at your neighbor's house, let's say, then you feel like you have the ability to help.
Yeah, that is true. Like there's this one area in Cape Town, it's quite a heritage area, and it's close to the city, so it's got a very rich history. And the houses, it's those type of row houses where the house itself is sort of set back maybe about 2 meters from the boundary, but it's raised up. So, and it's completely open. So it's raised up, but it's got this open porch. So people generally sit there and they see people walking past, and they'll maybe be chatting to their neighbors, or they'll be just maybe having a cup of coffee and just watching people go by. And it's such a safe environment there.
Yeah, I love neighborhoods like that.
And then everybody still wants their privacy also. So with that arrangement, the building is brought very close to the street boundary. So you actually still allowed more space for a yard or a back garden. So there's still that sense of privacy that you would need and want, but it just allows for more that surveillance of the streetscape, and it's just much more safer. And it creates that connectivity between yourself and your neighbor and the pedestrian walking by, and it's just so much like a more pleasant environment.
Yeah, totally. Erin, you were mentioning that you're really interested in that distance of the setback, and I'm wondering in your neighborhood, like what is the setback in the of the houses there?
I think so you're familiar with Edmonton. I'm in the Westwood neighborhood, and I'm actually in an infill. So I've got the mature neighborhood overlay. I believe it's a percentage. I can't remember exactly. I want to say mine's closer to the 4 meter mark, possibly a little further back. My front yard is almost as big as the backyard. And because it is, like, we are on display, which is a little uncomfortable at times because of the physical location that we're in and the traffic that we can get. There's a neighboring area that has a lot of homeless struggles because it's a lower income neighborhood that we're joining. So we don't spend as much time in the front yard as maybe we could. I would love to, when I mentioned wanting to bring it out, like front yard gardens would be a thing that I would love to implement kind of throughout the neighborhood. Try to bring people together, and food does that.
Yeah, totally. So our breakout room is going to close in 40 seconds. So does anybody want to share with the larger group when we go back?
I vote you.
No, not me. Well, I think there'll be an opportunity where if you want to share, you can just like unmute your mic and go for it. But yeah, I live in Parkdale, Cromdale, and my yard is like, I think my place is 5 meters back and it's too big.
Yeah.
Porch.
Yeah, there's nowhere to
Chelsea, we were halfway through and she was asking me a question. I couldn't find my unmute. I can if you'd like.
Thank you, Trina.
Happy to report on the conversation. I didn't get a chance to chat or to talk too much. My 3-year-old was having some issues that she needed attended to. So, but I did get to hear, and there's some good ideas that came up.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for joining the event today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Lindsay, everyone should be back now. All the breakout rooms are closed.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Henry. So just in the interest of time, I want to be really conscious of, it's almost 1:30. I don't want to go over past that time. So unfortunately, we don't really have any time left to have people share any highlights, but hopefully the conversation can continue past the event. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the Building to Thrive panel discussion. It's been such a great opportunity to hear from each of our panelists and also to participate in the small breakout discussions. So I just want to say thank you to each of our event sponsors. Thank you to Athabasca University, the Parkdale Cromdale Community League, and the Rat Creek Press for partnering with us to host this fantastic event and to have the opportunity to talk about how we can create safe spaces in our communities. Thank you to Athabasca University's RAIC Center for Architecture for having us today as part of the Global Studio. And thank you to our panelists that joined us today, Cynthia, Anne, Ophelia, George, Chelsea. What a great opportunity it has been to have each of you join us today to talk about why you're interested in safe spaces and to inspire each of us to consider new ways to help our communities thrive. So thank you. Following today's event, we're going to send out a survey requesting any feedback on the panel discussion or the breakout sessions. We're always open to feedback, and we're really interested to hear about what you guys thought about today's event. So please share any ideas you have for how we can make our next event even better. And one last thing I just wanted to mention, if you are interested in hearing more about AVID's Building to Thrive training, please connect with us. We love to hear from you, and we've actually created a free checklist to help you make your spaces safer. And I'm going to share that link to download the PDF in the chat box here, but we also have it linked to our bio on Instagram, so you can download it from there as well. So thanks again. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, and take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Hey, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
It was a really good talk.
So Lindsay, I've stopped recording now.
Oh, I'll do the same.